In chapter 3 of Ephesians, Paul's trying to articulate the magnitude of what the church, these new followers of Christ, is all about. So this is what he says. For this reason, I, Paul, am a prisoner for Christ Jesus on behalf of you Gentiles. So he clears his throat and he says, okay, it's your fault I'm in jail. Everything that God has been doing, I have stepped in to be a part of. And I want you to know that's why I'm in jail. If I had just stayed with where the story was, us and not them, me and not you, me and then you down here, then I wouldn't be in jail. Kind of, if I had understood the smallness of our faith, like our people own God, the tribal side-taking God, I wouldn't be here right now. I'm in jail because I'm participating in something bigger. And then he says something like this. If you pay attention, you're going to get that what we thought this was going to do is not what it did. It's a mystery. None of us saw this coming. It's huge. This mystery is that Gentiles, everybody that isn't a Jew, are fellow heirs, members of the same body. There is not only no us and them, but the them are in the will with you. There is no us and them so much so that this body that you belong to, their limbs on it. So this was a huge, scandalizing thing that I think maybe now in 2018 we're kind of like, yeah, you know what, I've heard that before. But you have to understand the shift in perception that's happening to find out what we thought God was doing was way, way different than what he was actually doing. And then he goes on further to say, even though I'm the worst of all the saints, I was given grace to announce to the Gentiles of all people, the riches of Christ. He says this thing was God's idea all along. We assumed we had it, but we didn't. So that through the church, through this group of ragtag individuals who are recognizing that there's something bigger going on than just our little club, through the church, the manifold wisdom, the multi-angled, nuanced wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the high up places. So all the movers and the shakers, all the most influential people in society who think that they're governing the direction of their little corner of humanity, it's bigger than that. It's through the church that keeps popping up in fresh and interesting ways that we find out this is where humanity is actually going. Not even the most influential people can grasp the insights of the mystery of God and what he's been up to this whole time. So this was huge. And then he says, it's through our trust in Jesus that we get unmediated access. Like, nobody's checking IDs at the door anymore. Okay, we have confidence through our trust in God. So I ask you not to lose heart over what I'm suffering for you, because I'm suffering for your glory. I used to throw Gentiles in prison. Now I'm in prison for you. Don't worry about it. How does he do that? Because he's in a cell that's only a few feet by a few feet. There's no TV in the corner. He doesn't get 3 squares a day. He only eats if someone brings him food. It's got a hatch at the top. He's chained to a wall. He can only write when the sun peeks through, and that's only if someone brings him some papyrus and some ink. Please, 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 don't lose heart. I get to do this for your glory, for your honor, for your significance. How in the world does he do that in that circumstance? And then he says this is why I bow my knees before the Father, for whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. Huge statement. When you used to be really elitist and exclusive, that's a huge statement. Turns out everybody's got the same dad. That Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. Now pay really close attention to this. That you, being rooted and grounded in love, that you may have the strength to comprehend along with all the saints the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, as well as to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowing things, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now, one thing to note here, Paul is not measuring the love. To mentally have the strength to comprehend the breadth and length and height and depth, as well as know the love of God. They're seemingly separate ideas. So what's he measuring here? Why is he praying that his readers would have the mental strength to measure something well? I was in Tesco a while back, and I was second in the queue at customer service, and I don't remember what my issue was, because I only remember what the woman who was in front of me's issue was, and the look on the young man's face behind the counter. Now, I'm going to spare you my Shrek voice. I'm not going to do this in my Shrek voice, but it was all this happened in very deep Scottish accent. She said, "This coupon says that I get a pound off my pizza." And I didn't get a pound off my pizza. And the young man behind her says, well, okay, I can, and she says, no, I don't want you to do anything except give me my pound. And the young man's going, okay, let me just get, and she says, no, I don't want you to get anyone. Just give me my pound. And then she yells this, and I don't mean elevated talking. She yells, "I want what's rightfully mine." Now, I didn't realize this in the moment, but I was slowly stepping back as this was happening. And I don't know what kind of day she was having. I don't know what else was going on in her life. But here's what I can tell you. She lost her sense of proportion in that moment. She lost her ability to measure the real breadth, width, height, and depth. And when you lose that, all you have left is the measurements of the interior of your cell. It's disconnected from the greater story. And so all you can do is blow things out of proportion because your whole life is as small as your cell. So everything you do is about, how do I get out of being mistreated and upset? Because it's all about me. I can't measure anything beyond the interior of my cell. Isn't it funny? I can walk up to you and poke you with a needle in the arm for about 3 to 5 seconds, and you'll hit me, right? That's about all the time you'll give me before you punch me right in the face. But if I dip it in ink and keep going, you'll pay me. Same pain, but your sense of proportion and dimension and measurement changes, does it not? You're able to recontextualize it into something bigger. This is why when the Ghostbusters reboot came out in 2016, you would have thought that Satan himself had descended on the earth and eaten our children by the way people were reacting to having all females in the lead. Because the preferences that some people had, it had been moralized. Because it's my nostalgia, right? It's a tradition of thinking about this a certain way. And you're changing it. You're changing the way I've preferred to think about things, and therefore I sound as though I have enemies that are making my life bad. They lost a sense of measurement, hadn't they? And when you lose your sense of measurement, when you lose your sense of proportion, of like how the actual universe is shaped, all you're left with is the interior dimensions of your cell. It's disconnected. And therefore, a female lead in Ghostbusters ruins your childhood and your adulthood, if there's a distinction. When we disconnect our lives from the greater story, the greater movement of reality that apparently the God of the universe has been doing since the beginning, unity, peace, our lives held together in the oneness of Christ. All we're left with is the dimensions of our own personal cell. And we become the kind of people who don't know the difference between the shape of our circumstances and the shape of the universe. We think that they're the same thing. And so what do? We shake our fists at God and at people. We blame and we stay anxious and angry and victimized. But somehow, Paul knew, sitting in his prison cell, and look, he probably would have rather been pushing his toes into beach sands and sipping a Mai Tai some days. I mean, Being spiritual doesn't mean pretending to like things you hate. But the way Paul's able to do that is he recognizes that his life was not his own. That he was contributing to the slow but beautiful continental drift back together. Separate people coming back together. So he knew that his individual hardship was hard, but it was meaningful because he was participating in the greater story. If you're not participating in the greater story, then your difficulties don't make a whole lot of sense, do they? And I'm telling you, that's when we're most miserable. When you can't make sense of your efforts. When your efforts feel divorced from something bigger in scope. I think some of us may feel like, I don't really get the point of my life or my ministry at all sometimes. But then someone shows up in your life and they say, well, wait a minute. There's something sacred about laundry. Hear me out. And you're like, what? No. There's something sacred about taking care of your home for this season right now. And taking a nap when you can because you've been up with your kid all night. Because you're showing the next generation that you don't have to have your ego stroked. And you don't need to be thrilled in every season for your life to derive meaning. And you're listening to this and you're like, that's right. This matters. This is sacred. It might be a little boring right now, but this matters. And you're good for another 2 or 3 weeks until you need to be reminded again. That person is reconnecting you to the broader narrative. Hey, it's more than this. Isn't the beauty of marital vows? Now remember, your marriage is the only relationship that you have to stand up in front of all of your friends and family and swear to God you won't end it. That should tell you something. But isn't the beauty of marital vows to have them running in the background so that you never say, this day is my marriage? This difficult season is my marriage? To remind you that this box that you're in, no matter how hard it is connected to the grand story of commitment and giving yourself to someone who was, of course, damaged when you met him, her, who isn't. And you said, I want to love you, and I want to be loved by you. Isn't that what the vows do? They remind us of that. And don't they also connect you to marriage? People being committed to each other? So doesn't it also connect you to love? One person lifting up the interests of another higher than their own? Those vows remind us today is not your marriage. Isn't that why people have started saying, we're not raising children, we're raising adults? We just start when they're young? It's a helpful reminder that today is not the metric of your parental success. That you can't measure your parental fortitude by that tantrum and that grade and that can you come pick me up at the police station phone call, right? If I don't get these designer jeans on you, then you won't look as good as the neighbor kid. We try to find ways to remind ourselves, I'm trying to create a constituent part to the narrative that's been told since the beginning of time. Today is not my parenting. You never get a review on how you did. Isn't that why we're trying to make sure that our kids do better than just getting into the right university and getting good grades and the right shoes? Who are we raising our kids to serve? What's the scope of their cell? Is it connected? Is their box where it ends? Are we modeling for them? Just work on your box. Decorate your box. Protect your box. Defend your box from mistreatment. This is why finding a job based on income, even if it's a lot of income, is something less than finding a vocation where you get to be you. Even if the vocation pays less, isn't it more? Isn't it great to be invested in something that you can say, man, what we're doing here is really important? Rather than being stuck in the, well, how can I climb the ladder and be the most important person in a job that I hate? No, I just want to be a part of it, man. Sit me on the floor. Give me an old laptop. Send me out for coffee. I just want to be a part of what's going on here. Isn't that better than choosing careers based on financial comfort? Aren't the strongest people among us the ones who know how to choose their battles because they're in the right one, and so they're not petty? Aren't those the people that we admire the most? And aren't the weakest among us those who make the shape of their world the shape of their prison cell? Their whole existence is just moving from bad day to bad day, and they're wounded, and they're cynical, and angry, and insulted. They just feel like they were entitled to a better cell, better treatment. They've forgotten this movie isn't about you. I know you're in every scene, so it's confusing. But this movie isn't about you. They were divorced from the story, so all they could do was maximize the little box that they're in. This isn't new. I'm not saying anything new. For years, we've been asking people, do you want to have a sense of meaning and expansiveness in your chest? Then you have to connect to something bigger than yourself. Do you want to heal? Do you want to get over the doldrums? Then you have to find something that's bigger than yourself. Because if our lives are reduced to just avoiding pain and steering around disappointment and living every day trying to avoid difficulty, then when difficulty comes, you're just going to be angry or depressed or confused about who God is. But when we recognize the story, the big story, and at least the church can be defined by that, right? Church is just a group of people with their ear to the ground saying, do you hear the bigger story? It's bigger. It's bigger. When we recognize the bigger story, the universal story of everything being reconciled and healed in love, then we're not only going to try not to make a life out of pain avoidance, we'll actually steer ourselves right into risk, right into challenge. You will. When you believe, hey, this matters, what the universe is up to, what God is up to, what the species needs, I get to contribute a little sliver. You'll steer right into difficulty and pain. Because life is boring trying to navigate around discomfort and disappointment all the time. It's boring. You'll steer right into it because you'll recognize, I get to be a part of the body in some way. I get to be a part of the story, and you'll celebrate it. So as we try to land this thing, consider this. Here's a really dangerous prayer for you. God, root and ground us. And don't say me. Even if you're praying this by yourself, say us. You know why. God, root and ground us in love. Grant us the strength to comprehend, like all the other saints, the breadth and the length and the height and the depth of our life. God, root and ground us in love. Grant us the strength to comprehend, like all the other saints, the breadth and the width and the height and the depth of our life. Because the last thing I want to be doing is standing at a counter, yelling about a pound, because it actually feels like it matters. Go live a great story.